knows all that is possible to know. The debate is over the content of that omniscience. That is, what sorts of knowledge are included in divine omniscience. And here, there are simply different views that Christians have had and do have. This book, Divine Foreknowledge, 4 views, goes through them. Greg Boyd presents the open theist view, which is typically called presentism. David Hunt presents the traditional Arminian view, known as simple foreknowledge. William Lane Craig presents the position known as middle knowledge, or Molinism, where God knows what you would do in any situation, and in all possible worlds that God could create. And Paul Helm defends the Calvinist view. God knows because he has ordained all things. So there are different understandings of the content. Does God know what we would do or not? Does God know, to be technical, would counterfactuals, or does God only know might counterfactuals? Well, open theists say God knows what might happen for beings with libertarian freedom. We reject middle knowledge, that God knows what we would guaranteed do in such situations. So we do have different views of omniscience. To say that openness says that God does not know the future, well, since we don't believe the future is real, we don't believe God knows an illusion. We believe God knows reality as it is. If the future is not a reality, then God knows it as not a reality. So one of the questions is, what is the status of the future now? The conventional view says that the future is fully definite, and God knows it as such, whereas we say the future is partly definite and partly indefinite, and God knows it as partly definite and partly indefinite. And then, let's see. Some have suggested that openness limits God. We believe that God restrains, just like Arminians, the full exercise of God's power in order to give us the degree of freedom that we call libertarian freedom. But this is not a limitation on God. This is God's sovereign decision to create us this way. If one says, and indeed, as Calvin did say, that God cannot feel pain, well, then that's something God can't do. Now he would say, but that's not a real limitation. That's a limitation of creatureliness. But it is something God can't do. There are things that God of classical theism can't do. Dr. White raised a question about what assurance does open theism give us for the Christian life? Well, this question is just as problematic for Arminians in the view known as simple foreknowledge as it is for open theists. And I have argued at length in my writings that the Arminian has tended to believe that just by God seeing what's going to happen, that gives God a providential advantage. But here I agree with the Calvinist criticism that doesn't give God an advantage. Because just seeing something is going to happen and knowing it's going to happen, if you know it's going to happen, you can't change it from happening, because that would render God's beliefs false. So hence, Dr. White's main criticism of open theism habitually has returned to the view of divine sovereignty that he has, or what I call meticulous providence. And that's indeed a key watershed divide. And that's the same watershed divide that is shared between openness and Arminians. So the issue of divine sovereignty is going to be the same with Arminians and openness. That is, the criticism is going to be the same that Dr. White presents against both openness and Arminians. So some of you might be thinking, well, then God isn't sovereign. Well, no, we believe the issue is the kind of sovereignty that God has decided to practice. And we believe that God has granted humans libertarian free will. And this allows us to love one another, but it also entails the possibility of great evils. Proponents of openness reject the belief that it is God's will for little girls to be sexually abused. We simply don't accept that. We do reject the theory of the blueprint, that God has ordained everything that is to come about. We do believe that we work together with God, as Paul said in 1 Corinthians, that we come to collaborate with God, and we work together with God. So some questions to ask are these. Do you believe our prayers of petition ever affect God? Do you believe that some of what God does is ever dependent upon what you do or don't do? Does God specifically desire the evil that we do? Now, I understand the Calvinist framework where it's still wrong for us to do it because we're the ones doing it. But does God specifically desire that we do the evil we do? And you might even be more poignant and say, well, does God desire that I be an open theist? And has God eternally ordained that I would be an open theist? Or quoting or modifying Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof, when he said, Lord, who made the lion and the lamb, you decreed I should be what I am. Would it spoil some vast eternal plan if I were Arminian? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sanders. Well, thank you first, but also please thank these two gentlemen for being here tonight. Okay, before we get started with the questions, first of all, I'll explain how this is going to happen. I'm going to have George come up, and he's going to be reading these questions from the podium because we both want to get this through the house and also through the video as well, and both of the microphones. First, before we start that, I do want to thank some of our volunteers that we've had here tonight, especially to Su Ping Kang and to Kathy, who have provided us with great service for the past couple days, as well as Su Ping for feeding all of us and letting us take over her house this afternoon. Also to Theo Benitez for helping us with transportation and moving of things around. But a special thanks also to you for staying with us tonight and for helping us to make this a great debate. Okay, let's start the question periods. And let me explain how this is going to happen. The person who the question is addressed to will have 1 minute to respond to the question. Then our other speaker will have 30 seconds to respond to his answer to the question. Okay.
We will be asking 5 questions to each of the 2 gentlemen up here. Unfortunately, not enough questions came in for Dr. White, so there'll only be 4 that we'll be asking him tonight.